Hey guys, I'm here with an extra bonus video this week. It is a time-lapse and a quick little tutorial of how I do this gunpowder piece, and this is one of the showcase pieces for my show in September. I started this piece by drawing out the layout that I wanted on computer paper, and then I transferred it onto the wood with regular transfer paper. Because of the overlapping elements, I did this piece in a series of stages. So I go back and forth between gunpowder and burning as I make the layers. But I started first with this smokeless gunpowder, and I'm using it to create the texture of the bark of one of the trees. So there's actually two different plants here. There's the main tree, and then there's a bittersweet vine that tangles around the tree. And I don't want them to get lost. I want them each to have their own unique feel. And so I'm going to use the gunpowder for the texture of the main tree, and then just wood burning fine lines for the vines, the bittersweet vines. Now these vines are actually an invasive species, but the reason I'm using them, there's actually two reasons I'm using them. The first is that we have bittersweet vines all over our property, our farm, and so I'm pulling the inspiration from the nature around me. And the second reason is actually because in the late fall, early winter, they start to produce these really beautiful red berries, and they have little tiny orange leaves that you'll see as this piece develops, that I thought would work really nicely with the color of the Cardinals. They would complement each other very well. This gunpowder creates a very yellow hue, and I think that also works not just for texture but color of the bark of the main tree. And you'll see in a little bit that I'm going to use masking tape to cover it up and use black powder for the background. And you can really see the color difference between the black powder and the gunpowder. I've learned to use the texture and the color to my advantage when using these different materials. I'm doing these burns in small sections for a couple of reasons. While it is more impressive and definitely more entertaining to do one entire slow burn, I personally like to do small burns because I'm working inside, first of all. It's very cold outside. It's starting to be winter here in New Hampshire. And so I like to keep the flame down. I like to keep the heat down. I'm also working on a plastic table with a paper background, so I don't want the flame to jump to the paper background. Additionally, the smoke, I don't want too much smoke to build up in the area that I'm working. And I do have a ventilation fan going. I have a blowing fan and also a heat source that's going. And when you have too much crosswind, the gunpowder can actually blow and move. And so just for the way this piece was set up, there were too many factors for me to do one slow burn. So I'm taking it in little tiny pieces. So now you'll see I took a break from the gunpowder to start to try to build the burn lines for the vines. I'm just doing thin, wavy lines. I'm using my nice thin spade. This is a fixed tip pen, which if you're new to wood burning, that means that this pen is all one unit. You can't change the tips out. I find that it works a lot better than using the interchangeable tips, but they are very expensive. So I use interchangeable tips for a majority of all my other different nibs, but for this particular spade that I use quite a bit, I have the individual pens that I use. And you'll see my my connector there. I don't quite 100% understand the technology of what has a plug-in and a plug-out, other than the companies want you to use only their pens. My husband was kind enough to switch out the pieces on the end of my wood burning machine. That red on the end of the pen is actually a male-to-male RCA adapter, which means that I can use pens that are not made for my machine, that would not typically connect to this machine, and switch them out. And this allows me to use razor tip pens, which I find are so far, in my opinion, some of the best pens I've ever worked with my Coalwood wood burner detailer unit, which I also really love the temperature control on. So that is just the workaround that I have so that I can use both types of pens. Since details are my favorite, you can see I get little lost here. Typically, I try to build up the piece consistently, meaning that for this piece, I really should have done all the vines and all of the branches before I started doing the cardinals, but I was having too much fun doing the cardinals, and so I just kind of kept going with what I wanted to work on. I also was procrastinating a little bit because the section above where I'm working on wasn't fully fleshed out, and I was running into some issues with how I wanted the branches to fit together consistently. So that was a little challenging to try to work out, but I think it worked out fine. Eventually I went back to doing the gunpowder, and then after I finished all of that, I knew I wanted to try out the black powder in the background as a faded background. So I actually had never tried the masking tape before, so I didn't know if this was actually going to work or not. And so it was a little bit of a risk, but spoiler alert, it worked out perfectly fine. So what I did was masking tape over everything that I didn't want the black powder and the smoke from the black powder to affect. And then I just laid out the black powder and set it on fire. As you can see, the black powder is actually much more combustible than the gunpowder. It creates more of a smoky cloud and a much faster boom effect rather than the slow burn of the gunpowder. It also produces more of a smoky black color and texture rather than the warm browns that the gunpowder produces. As you can see, I'm doing this outside. The amount of smoke that it produces and the smell is really bad to get it inside of your house. But overall, it's a very fast process and it cools down very quickly, so I can then bring it back inside and keep working on it. The masking tape worked even better than I expected. It produced really clean lines, and I'm really excited to be able to use this new technique in the future in other pieces. I really enjoy using the black powder as a background gradient. I think it just adds an extra layer of texture to the piece that's really nice and works really well. I'm going to continue to burn the top half just as I did the bottom half, switching between the gunpowder for the branches and the wood burning tools for the rest of the birds. If there's one thing I could change about this piece, I do think some of the female cardinals get a little lost. And so that is one thing that if I was to do a similar piece, I would try and make sure that the female cardinals pop just a little bit more. I move through watercolors very quickly because I've been doing them for a very long time. I know the whole process. I know how I want things to look. I've also made tons of cardinal ornaments. I mean, I want to say at least 50 cardinal ornaments. So I know my colors already. So I don't need to test things out. I don't need to practice because I know exactly what I want. I'm using cadmium red. I'm also using black watercolor, Winsor Newton black, and I'm watering it down and mixing it with white gouache to get that nice gray color. And then I'm using the straight black for the face and for little details. For the bittersweet vines, I'm mixing a little bit of orange and a little bit of yellow, and I am doing burnt sienna as well for the vines, so that it not only has a different texture, but it has a different color from the main tree. Additionally, something I didn't mention before was the main tree has shed its leaves by this point in the season, so that's why it doesn't have any leaves. If you were doing a spring composition, you would have to pay attention to the leaves of the main tree as well. But again, I wanted visual consistency and a complementary color palette, so
I didn't want any greens or yellows to be too overwhelming. I just wanted the red to really pop. For this particular wood, the watercolor gets really sucked up. So a lot of times I will cover the bird in water first and then place the water with color in it. And then when I'm doing really fine lines or fine details, I'm using a lot of watercolor, Then when I'm doing really fine details, I'm using pigments that have a lot of pigment and a lot less water to get those fine lines. But you have to let the initial wash that you did, dry first before you can get these really fine lines. And as with all my pieces, I finish off with a top coat of white gouache to add in little details and dots and lines. This is done after everything is absolutely dry. If you try to do this when the undercolors are not dry, you will not be able to achieve those really fine lines. And so you need to wait until it's dry, and then you can go ahead and pop those white lines on there and really make it pop. I think it adds an extra layer of dimension. I get so many compliments on that. It doesn't make it a traditional watercolor to do that, but my style really doesn't fit traditional watercolors as is, and it's a mixed media piece for me as is, and so I really enjoy adding in those little bits of white gouache to just make things really nice, highlighted and detailed. Overall, this piece was really fun to make, and the exciting part was that it sold only 2 days after I finished it, so I'm just really excited about that. I do have prints as well as cards available in my online store. If they're sold out and you still want some, please do reach out via social media and ask me, and I will make sure to give you another copy. They don't stay in the store very long, but I can always make extras.
Thanks so much for watching. I hope you guys found this video helpful. If you did, please don't forget to give it a like. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. Leave me a comment in the comment box below if you'd like to see more gunpowder art. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, remember to create, love, and travel on. Bye!